this program, Where Will We Grow, with the famous Eric Anderson from Maricopa Association of Governments. Lambda Alpha International was founded in 1930, and its goal is to just spread knowledge of land economics. It's encourage support of the study of land economics, expand the world's knowledge of things related to land economics, celebrate the people who are involved in it, and then contribute to the enrichment of urban and rural environments. I'm probably not going to go into all these details. If you'd like to join Lambda Alpha International, we're looking for experienced land professionals to be involved. We also have a group that is that for younger members that we can provide, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. It's a smaller group. We have, I think, currently around 80 members. It's just a great organization, great networking, great marketing. We have some phenomenal sponsors. Colliers International is a big sponsor. They are the annual sponsor. We're so appreciative to them for doing what they've done. And Chaz Smith has been a long-term board member and an important piece of seeing Lambda Alpha grow locally. So appreciate Chaz, appreciate Colliers International for their sponsorship. We'd also like to thank Applied Economics for their sponsorship today. Applied Economics, the support of this and for this program specifically, and we're appreciative of what they do in the community. And so Applied Economics, thank you very much for being involved today. And we look forward to having you involved in some other things in the future. We'd love for you to become members and for individuals and grow with us. So thank you. I don't know how many board members are on here today. I don't see the list, but Jeff Semrose, our president. And then we have, I know there was a list of board members on there earlier. So normally we take some time to recognize those, but it's a little different not being in person. So hopefully before too long, we will be back in a room together, having lunch and enjoying these as individuals in person, but it's not where we are today. Today's program, Where Will We Grow? We have Eric Anderson, who has been involved in MAG he's been at MAG for 20 years, been involved in MAG doing consulting since 1983, which I did not know until we just chatted. He has been involved in major projects in the sales tax implementation. They are the regional planning organization for filtering through federal tax dollars and implementing the long-term transportation strategy, among other things, throughout the Valley. And Eric has been very involved in that since I've been in the Valley, since 1998. Eric has been the face and the voice and oftentimes a voice of rational decision-making for MAG. It's a tough role. It's all the different groups and all the different battles over resources and money. And Eric has been a stalwart. If he's lasted this long in such a sometimes hyper-politicized environment, you're doing something really well. So real quickly, while he's getting started, if you have some questions during this and want to use the chat box to ask the questions, I'm sure he'll be able to respond to those at the end. So I'm not talking anymore. I turn it over to Eric. Thank you very much for joining us.
All right, with any luck, I have my slide on the screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. Can you see that, Scott?
We've got it, great.
Yep. Okay, just want to make sure that I'm not talking to a blank screen or anything. So thank you all for joining us today. Really pleased to be here. This is going to be a little bit different presentation than I've done in the past. So those of you who have heard me before, you might be a little surprised. It's a little bit different. I'm going to talk about how transportation really unlocks trap value. And I'm going to start with a kind of a refresher course on the economic impacts of transportation, just a real quick summary of that. I'm going to walk through some major transportation projects we have here in the Valley and kind of demonstrate how it really has positively affected our economic development profile. And then last thing, I'm going to talk about how the transportation investments we've made here, especially since we implemented our sales tax back in 1985, built our freeway system and our light rail system, and how those have impacted land values and development patterns here in the Valley. So much of what I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of slides is from this book, Jean-Paul Rodrigue, who's a professor in Department of Global Studies and Geography at Hofstra. And he had a couple of quotes. This is a great book, by the way, if you're really a transportation geek. It probably is way more than you ever wanted to know about transportation, but it really is a great resource document. It covers everything from freight to urban growth. So, but it is a graduate level book also. So in his book, he says, transport systems are efficient. They provide economic and social opportunities and benefits that result in positive multiplier effects, such as better accessibility to markets, employment, and additional investments. When transport systems are deficient in terms of capacity or reliability, they can have an economic cost, such as reduced or missed opportunities and lower quality of life. So once again, I'm going to talk about kind of the three levels or the three types of economic impacts. If you look on the left side of the slide, there's core impacts. These are really the fundamental impacts of transportation. Increasing capacity, for example, also reduces the costs. Increasing capacity to move goods and people, which implies economies of scale, thus lowers the cost of those mobility. Mobility becomes much more affordable. On an operational level, increased transportation investments lower travel times and provide greater reliability, which we from a commute standpoint, reliability is extremely important. People will tend to accept longer commutes as long as the travel time is reliable too. And the last category is geographic. Obviously, as you put in new transportation investments, it changes the accessibility of adjacent properties. Thus, it expands the market area and the economic value of those adjacent properties. But there's also locational impact too, because as you improve the urban transportation system, people and companies will choose to locate differently than they might otherwise. And so those are the locational aspects. And all transportation investments are not the same. So different transportation investments have different economic impacts. And this is a really important concept. A lot of people think, well, one kind of transportation investment is the same as any other. It's not true at all. There are certain transportation investments that have high multiplying effects, and I'm going to go through one of those in particular here in a minute. It's really, especially when you have new infrastructure put into place, you have new connectivity and new capacity, and you open up new economic opportunities. Those of you who participated in LAI's webinar last month, which with Christine McKay and Chris Camacho, City of Phoenix and GPAC, extensive discussion about the impact of the new South Mountain Freeway on the development opportunities in the southwest part of the valley. There are other types of transportation investments that have more average multiplying effects. They have a good positive impact, but they don't have necessarily the large impact that a new facility might have. And then you also have types of projects that have low multiplying effects. And I'll talk about one of those in particular. Doesn't mean, just because they have a low multiplier, doesn't mean they're not extremely important in terms of improving our transportation system here in the valley. So let's talk about what Chris and Chris talked about last month, and new highway construction in the South Mountain Freeway. I think this is a good example of a transportation investment has major multiplier effect, and for a variety of reasons. One, it's a greenfield development. Those of you who are familiar with this area of the valley, it's really suffered from lack of good accessibility. It wasn't accessible from the southeast at all without the South Mountain Freeway in place. And then once you, in the Levine area suffered from a lack of good river crossings there too. And so the whole development of the southwest part of the valley really was held back because it didn't have the kind of transportation infrastructure compared to other parts of the valley. Even though it has a great location, you know, if you look at Levine, you know, it's if you stand on a tall building down there, you can see downtown Phoenix, you know, 10 minutes away. So greenfield development, new facility put in a greenfield development has obviously a major multiplier effect. One of the things that South Mountain Freeway has done is it provided that new connectivity. And this is a slide that Chris and Chris used last month, really talking about their vision for the South Mountain corridor in the Levine and southwest part of the valley. And one of the things that South Mountain Freeway has done is links the East and West Valley labor markets. So if you look at where the high-tech manufacturing is in the valley, it's largely in the East Valley. And if you also look at where the labor force is for the high-tech manufacturing, lo and behold, it's also in the East Valley. And so we had a situation that as these kind of companies continue to be attracted to the urban area, they looked at, said, well, where is the current high-tech manufacturing? And also, where's the labor force? And lo and behold, that was in the East Valley. Well, now with the South Mountain Freeway, we actually have a good connection between the Southeast and Southwest Valley. And so high-tech manufacturers who are located along the South Mountain corridor now have better access to the labor market in the East Valley too. And so I think it really, will be interesting to see how the City of Phoenix's strategy pans out in terms of creating the South Mountain Technology Corridor. And also, there are people down there, and one of the things that the residents in the southwest part of the valley and the kind of the general Levine area have really bristled about is the lack of good retail opportunities. Well, here you have a new freeway coming through, and all of a sudden, new freeways open up those better access to these areas, and basically broadens the market area served by the adjacent parcels. So all of a sudden, you have great new retailing opportunities, and you'll see the kind of development that's occurring down in the Levine area now, and I think it's a really exciting time. The other thing it does, and not to lose sight of it, it has also, as we continue to build out our transportation system, it has a big impact on other parts of the system. So this is a chart showing the delay profile on I-10. So this is basically everything from Buckeye all the way down to the Santan Freeway in terms of the I-10 corridor. And you'll see remarkably when South Mountain opened, what happened to delay on I-10 reduced significantly. And once again, this is the one of the other benefits of the transportation system here. It's a project.
Eric, we've lost your audio.
Uh-oh. I don't know what happened. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good now.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. So a new corridor that provides redundant capacity, alternative routes, spreads that traffic volumes out over a bigger system and results in reductions in delay too. And so South Mountain really has been a big winner in terms of opening up the greenfield development for both high-tech manufacturing, because it's now we're linking the labor markets together. It's opening up retail opportunities because the market area served by these properties is bigger. More people can access these areas in the same amount of time than could before. And it also provides us new capacity in the system and takes pressure off of other elements of our transportation system. So once again, South Mountain is that high multiplier effect. It really has done wonders for positive benefits for our transportation system and our economic development here in the Valley. So let's talk about the economic impact of light rail. Much different, obviously, kinds of impact. Clearly, where light rail is running today are areas that had a lot of economic activity. Historically, have been centers of development. Obviously, the downtown Phoenix, downtown Mesa, and downtown Tempe areas have not suffered from a lack of development historically. But as the pattern development has shifted over time, there really has been a change in the economic profile of these areas. So I use Apache Boulevard as a great example. And so, you know, the picture on the left is from the early 70s. And you look at that, at the gas prices there, that is not $3.19 a gallon, that's 31.9 cents a gallon. So I looked at that and I said, man, the gas couldn't have been $3 a gallon. It wasn't, it was 32 cents. So, but when I went to ASU back in the day, and the way Apache Boulevard looked in the early 2000s really hadn't changed much at all. And that's largely because it lost a lot of the attractiveness once the Superstition Freeway was built, starting in the early 70s. And so as the Superstition Freeway was built, US Route 60, which used to be run down Apache, actually ran down Grand Avenue, Van Buren, Apache Boulevard, and then out Main Street in Mesa. That designation was moved down to the Superstition Freeway, and consequently, a lot of that through traffic who frequented businesses along the old US 60 went away. And without additional investments in those areas to open the accessibility of Apache Boulevard up, there wasn't much happening at all. And you know, it just didn't change much at all. Once light rail came through there, not only you had major new investments, largely because there was a lot of that area now became a lot more accessible. There's no way that ASU, for example, would have located its some of its major operations in downtown Phoenix without the light rail going into that, serving that area and linking the Tempe campus and the downtown campus. Accessibility just was not good enough to stimulate that sort of change. And so now we see a tremendous amount of investment really throughout that corridor. That's really exciting. And this was, you know, prime development property that really lacked good accessibility. And so once light rail went in, it really made a big difference in terms of the market opportunities that existed. And of course, the growth in ASU, the Tempe campus in particular, and downtown, you can't short that. That certainly was an important item too. So it's probably a good time to say, you know, transportation is really a necessary element for development, but it's not sufficient. You have to have a lot of other things happening. So one of the things that we talk about new freeway corridors in the context of South Mountain. Well, back in the 80s, there was a great concept west of the White Tanks Mountains to build the Sun Valley Parkway. And private sector got together and issued some private bonds and built the roadway. And the whole concept was, we'll build it and that will stimulate development. Well, unfortunately, the market wasn't quite out that far west, and it's still just emerging out there today. And so once again, that's a great example of if you build it, they may come, they may not come, but transportation accessibility is important, but you also have to look at all the other factors that influence the demand side of the equation too. So light rail does unlock trap value, no doubt about it. It has a more average multiplier effect because you don't have the large greenfield developments. You're talking about much more intense development in the urban core area, higher density development, both on the residential and office side. But the rail components have provided better connectivity and reliability, much easier to access, and a much larger effective market area for adjacent properties. And the investments that have happened since the rail went in is been outstanding. 12.2 billion of private sector investment, and another $4 billion in the planning stage. So it's clear that that trap value that we saw all along the light rail corridor has now been untrapped or released. So, but there are other transportation investments have lower economic impacts, but are also critical. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Broadway Curve improvement project that will be getting underway in about 15 months or so. This is a $700 million project to fix, quote, I'm using air quotes on that, fix the Broadway Curve problem, which suffers from lack of good lack of capacity, and also suffers from tremendous weaving issues. And weaving, as people try to change lanes and get to where they want to go, which lane they want to be in, destroys freeway capacity. And so there's a number of improvements being planned for this area that we think will significantly improve the weave condition and effectively improve the capacity, the throughput capacity of I-10. In this whole area. Major employment corridor, obviously, many employers and employees are dependent on this corridor on an ongoing basis. And after it's fixed at the tune of $700 million, there will be less delay and more reliability in the corridor. And so, but there won't be a lot of adjacent properties being developed, because obviously this is not a greenfield development, it's not even a brownfield development. This is just fixing some roadway configurations that will improve traffic flow and greater reliability and safety again. So effectively there'll be an increase in capacity, but it won't be because we're putting down a whole bunch of new lanes in there. So the efficiency of our system and making sure that we fix bottlenecks also has a tremendous impact, but you don't have the adjacent property impacts that you have on other kinds of projects. So is $700 million for this project worthwhile? Yes, this is our busiest corridor in the valley, section of freeway in our valley, carries over 300,000 vehicles a day, and obviously is an important both regional, state, and national freight corridor too. So really important that we continue to improve. So I'm going to talk about kind of what we've seen as the impact on the overall development patterns in the valley, and kind of how how transportation has impacted land values and our quality of life here, which is kind of the bottom line and why we do this. So this is a diagram that the map on the left is the roadway network at the time that we passed Proposition 300 in 1985. So that was the first time, I think, in the country that a major metro area had passed a dedicated sales tax for transportation. And so you'll see at the time, we had I-10, which wasn't complete. You'll see there's no red line going through downtown Phoenix and around by the airport yet. And certainly the 101 and 202 were lines on a map in our plan, but certainly there was no progress in getting those facilities built. What we see today, or in 2018, once again without South Mountain in place yet on this map, we've seen some major investments. And the impact of this is that we did a simulation, and let me explain this a little bit. So we said, in terms of commute times, today, average travel time for commute trips is about 22 minutes, a little under 22 minutes on average. We did a simulation. If we took away the loops 101 and 202 as examples and reran our computer models, average commute time would have gone up to 32 minutes. Now, obviously, if we hadn't built freeways, if our freeway system looked today as it looked in 1985, we wouldn't have 4.5 million people here in the valley. People would be distributed differently. Commutes would be different, one thing or another. So you have to look at this with a grain of salt. But clearly, the freeways have made a big change in commute times in the valley. And for every minute you save sitting in traffic, it has a big impact on your quality of life. So this is something that, and you can also do this, if you look at Google Maps, look at your travel time to work. Mine's real short right now. I walk down the hall, but if you look at how long it takes you to get to work, and then you can toggle it and say, I don't want to use freeways, and look what happens to your travel time. So once again, you can look at this from your own personal perspective. So the other thing that obviously our freeway system is a big player in terms of where people want to live and work. 80% of our employment in the valley is within 2 miles of a freeway or light rail system. So, and you'll see the chart on the right-hand side shows you the distribution by size of employee. So again, 80% of the employment is within 2 miles of a light rail or freeway corridor. So big draw. Obviously, businesses like to be at freeways because it gives them greater market area. People don't like to live next to freeways, which is fine because of noise and congestion, one thing or another. But once again, we really, I think this shows how important our highway system in particular is to employment here in the valley. And obviously with the this is the map of commercial new building permits since 2000, actually through 2018. And you'll see that so many of the commercial permits are once again around our highway network and our light rail network. So this is the map at downtown new build permits issued in downtown since 2008. So one of the things we also looked at is the change in value per parcel by distance from freeways, and then I have another chart showing you by light rail. And so the blue up here is commercial parcels that are within half mile of a freeway, and so you'll see that 233% increase in average full cash value since 2000. Clearly, it has a big impact on land values, proximity to freeways. Not so much on residential, which also makes sense too. Once again, I'm not sure freeways are a positive aspect for residential development. Light rail, you see the same sort of thing. A big increase here in the commercial. In the growth of values, once again, of commercial parcels within a half mile light rail, almost a 400% increase in values, much higher than anything else too. And so once again, I think this really demonstrates that, as you add transportation investments, if you're smart about it, you put them in the right place and do the right things, it does have tremendous impact on average property values and development patterns here in the valley, no doubt about it. So one of the things that's really important to understand is how do we pay for all this? I mentioned Prop 300, which passed in 1985, and then Prop 400, which was the renewal of the tax in 2004. So that tax is due to expire in the end of calendar year 2025. We lost, because of the Great Recession, our revenues at the end of the day over the 20-year period will be about 40% less than we thought they were going to be when we implemented the tax in 2006. Once again, the Great Recession just really undercut our revenue stream. We lost revenue over 3 straight years, and it took us about 10 years to get back to where we were in 2007. So we're running north of $450 million today. The COVID-19 pandemic has has significantly reduced our revenues. Our last month, our revenue, our latest revenue we got, we informed last week. And that was for business activity. In April, we were down, in the order of 14, 15% in terms of sales tax revenues. And so we expect that to be hopefully temporary, and will recover fairly quickly. Although, once again, with the current concerns about rates spiking, we'll see what happens to that too. So we are in the process of looking at extending the half-cent sales tax, asking the voters again to trust us to invest the proceeds in the best way possible here in the Valley. We are looking, the current tax is a half-cent. We are looking at possibly asking the voters for more to come on that. There's a lot of, obviously, a lot of political calculus that has to go into that decision. But one of the things that we now understand is that although we've done a great job here in the Valley, quite frankly, in making really good strategic transportation investments, other metro areas are doing a lot more than we are. And we're looking right now at kind of how our investment per capita here in the Valley stacks up relative to our competing metro areas. And I will tell you that we're behind again at a half-cent, no doubt about it. One of our major areas that we need to do a lot more work on is our public transportation system. We have major areas in the region that have little transit or no transit at all. And some of the transit lines run at less than good frequency. That's the other thing we're looking at. Another big impact of the pandemic is the impact on public transportation. And will people feel comfortable sitting on a bus or light rail vehicle? So ridership is down a little over 50% on the bus and rail in the Valley. And not surprising, given that many people are still telecommuting on a daily basis. So we'll see how that reappears. So a lot of challenges, a lot of big projects yet to go. I mentioned the right-of-way curb project. That'll go into construction late next year. We also have a project that's due to obligate this fall, which will be widening I-10 in the West Valley from State Road 85 to Verado Way. It'll be adding one lane in each direction and rebuilding the Watson and Miller Road interchanges. And the other project that's due to obligate later this year too is the extension of State Route 24 in the East Valley to Ironwood. Ironwood's the first north-south street out in the Pinal County area. So that should go under construction later this year too. So stay tuned. You'll see more about the proposal to extend the tax. It's important that we continue to improve our transportation system and maintain what we have. So I'll be happy to answer any questions from the group.
Thank you, Eric. That's phenomenal information, and you guys are really good at collecting data and turning it into something that's understandable and usable. If you want to use your chat box for questions, I do have some questions I will ask, but I always like to make sure that other people have the ability to ask them, because I have a video and a microphone, so I have an advantage.
Yes.
But while people are writing down their questions they might have for you, I wanted to ask you, really from a roadway capacity perspective, what do you think is the most important strategic investment that MAG, the region, is looking at over the next 20 years as the Valley grows in the direction it grows?
In terms of roadway capacity?
Yep.
I think the big one is State Route 30 in the southwest part of the Valley. I think anybody who who uses I-10 in the West Valley on a daily basis sees the need for that pretty much on a regular basis, no doubt about it. You know, there was supposed to be another freeway in the West Valley called the Paradise Freeway, which was actually north of I-10. That got taken out through some action by Governor Symington in the mid-90s. And consequently, the West Valley really suffered from lack of high capacity roadways. And so State Route 30, which runs 4 or 5 miles south of I-10, I think it will be a big boon to the southwest part of the valley, take pressure off I-10 and provide, once again, some alternative routing, which is also very important.
We have a question here from Mark Lewis. Can we keep bus and rail share of the funds under 25% of the total spending for the tax increase? Voters don't support more light rail and bus compared to freeway improvements. And that's always the push-pull between, you know, the different cities and what they prioritize. But what are your thoughts on going forward and how that proportion of tax revenues are going to go towards transportation spending?
Well, I think the statement that voters don't support light rail is wrong. I mean, it's been demonstrated time and time again. The last one was a referendum or the initiative was referred back to the ballot. The City of Phoenix rail program last August defeated every precinct, I think except for one in the City of Phoenix. And, you know, once again, we look at transportation as a portfolio of modes. And they all kind of work together. Once again, I challenge anybody to say, how could we have done a better job in stimulating redevelopment along the light rail line other than what happened? You know, how do you take the property that certainly has been underutilized from a market perspective for all these years, use Apache Boulevard as an example, and you know, how else could we have stimulated that kind of development? And once again, the market has spoken. And so once again, public transportation is subsidized. Highways are subsidized. We have a $7 billion deficit on the highway side in this region for maintenance. That's documented now between 2025 and 2050. How are we going to maintain what we have? When Proposition 300 was put into place in 1985, the concept was the region would pay for the capital costs for the Loop 101. In the state, ADOT through the state gas tax would pay for maintenance. The gas tax hasn't changed since 1991. We're still operating a 21st century transportation system on 1990 revenues. It doesn't work. And once again, gas tax is not being used for anything other than roads and streets. It's protected constitutionally. So we have some major issues. And so if highways weren't subsidized, we wouldn't have a maintenance issue, but they are. And we have to, you really have to keep that in mind.
We have another question here from Rick Brammer. Is there any update on the timing of the Capitol Mall / West I-10 light rail project?
Yeah, that's nice hearing from you, Rick. Thank you for sponsoring this. Appreciate it. So the first section, the Capitol Mall I-10 project's been broken down into two segments. One is getting it from downtown Phoenix to the Capitol area. That one, I think the last, I had a map up there, but I think it's 2023 opening. That's probably going to be delayed because of some of the funding issues we have right now. Maybe a year, maybe less. And then obviously South Central is under construction too. The other section of the I-10 West project is extended from the Capitol out to 79th Avenue and I-10. That's going to be a longer term project. It's going to cost more money, and we'll be looking at some of the perhaps some alternatives to one of the things that we're looking pretty intently at is bus rapid transit, which in some corridors we think will actually work better and is less expensive than light rail.
We got a question from Rico West. How will the future expansion of I-11 benefit not only the West Valley, but the entire Metro Phoenix area?
Well, I think, I-11 is an interesting project. We actually did some of the early work on I-11 out in the Hassayampa Valley back in the 2006, 7, and 8 time period. Fortunately, once again, the Great Recession emerged and kind of put those plans on hold. I-11, the concept is building something from the Mexican border all the way to Las Vegas as a full freeway. I'll say it again, you know, Phoenix and Las Vegas are the two largest metro areas in the country that aren't connected by a freeway. I think there's a great economic opportunity that could be achieved if that was built. But I think from a regional perspective, other than the fact that it would stimulate development from a statewide perspective, it's a lower priority from a regional perspective. Again, we're trying to make sure that we have good mobility for freight and people here in the Valley. And if it came down to State Route 30 or I-11, you know, State Route 30 would be by far our highest priority.
Please provide any more questions that you have. I have a few more while we're waiting for other people to maybe type in some additional questions. The public transportation piece, there's such a critical linkage between local municipalities generating their own local public transportation and creating connectivity among regional transportation. How do you see us creating a kind of bridging the gaps between those local and the regional transportation systems? Because I know, especially in what you consider suburbs, Surprise, Goodyear, Buckeye, and the West Valley, creating a more seamless public transportation system is proven to be a challenge over the years.
It certainly is, Scott. It's a challenge, and it comes back to the way that we've historically funded public transportation here in this region. So most, if not all, other major metro areas have a unified regional transportation district or operation. Utah Transit Authority, regional transportation, public transportation, and the local funding. So we know we have City of Phoenix has a 0.7 cent sales tax, or public. We have cities that are contributing, are basically paying a lot for public transportation out of their general fund or dedicated tax in the case of Tempe and Phoenix, and others that haven't done that yet. And so, you know, from an equity perspective, we're always looking at how do we make sure kind of everybody's paying their fair share, and that's going to be a challenge moving forward. So if we had to start it over again, would we do it this way? No, probably wouldn't. But it's a sort of thing. How do we move to something that is more seamless in the future? And we're working on that. It's not going to be easy. It's a pretty heavy lift.
I mean, it's not easy to get 22 government entities to agree on how to do something.
That's
shocked. A couple other questions, and actually Jeff Semro and Rick Brammer have a similar question. Are there any proposals for imposing a use tax or similar charge on electric vehicles to account for the loss of gas tax revenue for electric vehicles? And Rick Brammer's question, how can we charge electric car owners for highway maintenance?
Well, that's a really good point. And, you know, there was a bill in the legislature this year to do that. Noel Campbell, House Representative from Prescott area, had proposed a bill that both increased the gas tax as well as taxed electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, alternative fuel vehicles too, and put them on an even basis. Because I think what's happened, certainly early on, we're trying to encourage non-fossil fuel vehicles, but we really have a situation now that with increasing fuel economy, hybrids, electric vehicles, you know, not everybody's paying their fair share, and roadway maintenance is really important. So as I mentioned, on the highway side alone, we have $7 billion deficit. So there was a bill in the legislature to impose some taxes on alternative fuel vehicles. It's interesting because a lot of the commercial fleet operators who switched to like natural gas or propane didn't like that. But, you know, once again, I think at some point we have to make sure everybody's paying their fair share. Longer term, a vehicle miles tax, something that, you know, using a roadway is much like using electricity. You ought to be charged for what you use. And there are mechanisms now that can do that and protect people's privacy. And so I think long term, I think we're going to move in that direction. I keep looking for the federal government to have leadership in this, because I think if you're going to do something like this, having a comprehensive national strategy to convert from a gallonage type basis that we have now on the fuel tax to something different will take a lot of work, and I think having it done at the national level makes a lot of sense.
I have some other questions, but if anybody else has some questions, please use the chat feature or the Q&A feature. I want to make sure we get the most out of our time with Mr. Anderson here. As we look at regional cooperation this time around with the sales tax extension, obviously, you know, it was so heavily an East Valley versus West Valley in a lot of ways, that discussion the last time around, back in, what was that, 2002, 2003, somewhere in that range. How have you seen that change? And there's been a lot more regional cooperation in a lot of ways. There's a lot more understanding that major employment coming to different regions is a huge benefit to every city in that area. What do you anticipate seeing in this process for the sales tax extension?
Well, I think we're certainly going to have robust discussions, and you know, I would like to think that the East-West Central, you know, tug of war is not going to happen, but it will, you know, because I think we're elected officials are elected to, you know, to do what they do, and so I certainly appreciate that. But I will say that things have changed quite a bit, and you know, I think the wake-up call during the Great Recession really was a big wake-up call for people, and I think it got people to really understand that, you know, we have to work together as a region, as a state, to improve our economic circumstance, and we're much better doing that together as opposed to you know, trying to cut each other's legs out from under them. And I think we saw a major shift in that focus, and I think we have a high level of regional cooperation now. You know, one of the things that happened in 1985 when Prop 300 was put on the ballot, we had absolute regional support for that. And in 2004, despite the political wrangling to get to the point that we put something on the ballot, it came out of our process with unanimous approval too. And so I think that says it all. I think we got everybody together, and we'll do it again. It's not easy. It's not pretty. You know, they say making sausage isn't something you really want to look at, but that's what we do. And I think we're, you know, we can get there again.
We have another question from Mark Lewis. Can we support hydrogen-fueled buses instead of all electric? I don't even know what that technology looks like.
Yeah. A lot of our buses are alternative fueled with LNG now, and as opposed to electric. So, you know, hydrogen fuels, I think, has a great future. So we were scheduled to hook up with the Nikola trucking people here before all this hit. So we were really anxious to look at what they were doing on the heavy truck side. And they just announced I think a pickup version of their hydrogen fuel vehicle too. So once again, I think in the space, there's a lot happening in there, and I think there's a lot of potential too. And so we'll continue to look at that. You know, we're kind of agnostic when it comes to fuels. So we need to make sure that we consider them all.
If you, again, we've got a question here. I think that's from Chaz. What is the status of the north-south freeway connecting the 60 South to the I-10 in Pinal County?
It's kind of in limbo, and you know, one of the things that that the north-south freeway in Pinal County has in common with I-11, they're both kind of stuck in the EIS process, environmental impact statement process at the moment. They're both under what's called a Tier 1 process, and under a Tier 1 EIS process, you get to about a 2,000-foot corridor. And then you have to go to a Tier 2 to actually define the center line for the highway. You can't go to Tier 2 unless you have funding, some kind of funding in place to actually implement the project. And for I-11 and for the North-South Freeway in Pinal County, there is no funding yet. There's a little bit of funding that may come out of the Pinal County RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority in Pinal County, but not enough to build the whole freeway. not even close. So we'll have to continue to look at how we get that facility built. I think for the future of Central Arizona, once again, the North-South Freeway and I-11 provide that parallel capacity to I-10. So if you look at I-11's to the west I-10 and North-South Freeways to the east I-10, that's really our system plan to have those high capacity highways that provide that redundant capacity.
Thanks for that question. While I'm waiting to see if anybody else has any more questions, we were talking a little bit before it started about the kind of how the traffic has changed. There's a lot more trucking. There's throughput. Phoenix is taking a stronger role in distribution warehouse. There's some manufacturing. There was a big announcement about a chip manufacturer. I don't know how much trucking that's going to generate, but is there anticipated, and how would MAG potentially look at a shift to heavier truck traffic, throughput traffic and internal traffic, and maybe a shift away from as much commuting? And how does that affect funding, and how does that affect planning?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're still trying to figure out what the impact of all this is going to be, both in terms of the whole telecommuting patterns. About 8% telecommute on an average basis before all this happened, and so if that went up to 15 to 20%, have a big impact on our highways, and obviously a loss of gas tax revenues again. On the truck side, certainly we have a lot more at-home shopping going on, let's say, and I think truck activity, especially the smaller delivery trucks, are going to continue to be a fairly important part of the whole system. We do a lot on the freight side. So we did a fairly extensive employer survey a couple of years ago, and looking at kind of how the freight industry is changing over time. That's really important for us to understand kind of how the whole logistics industry is shifting, and how the whole distribution chain, supply chain operates. We're kind of lucky here in the metro area. Especially in the West Valley, there's a lot of warehousing distribution centers, as I think people on the call all certainly see. And proximity to Southern California is obviously an important factor in that, and a good roadway connection. That's why this project we have programmed for later this year for I-10 widening is really important. We have major safety issues on that section of I-10, really from Verrado all the way to 85. And so at some point, the state of Arizona is going to have to come up with some money to widen I-10 all the way to the California border too. And that's something else, I think from a statewide perspective, the State Transportation Board meets tomorrow. There's a recommendation from staff that about $700 million of the draft ADOT 5-year program be shifted out. And so expansion projects for the rest of Arizona. There's a big project just north of Wickenburg to close what they call the gap. That's proposed to be taken out. Some of the funding we're looking at for I-10 between here and Casa Grande, we think may be removed. We all excited when ADOT got the grant for I-17 widening up the hill. ADOT's looking at how do we scale that project down to available revenue. So once again, we've been trying to encourage ADOT to take it slowly. Let's take one step at a time. Don't make any drastic changes in years 3, 4, and 5 yet. Let's take some time and look at where revenues are. But once again, the pandemic and the impact on the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund, which is over half of that is made up of gas tax and diesel fuel revenues, and then another 25-30% made up of VLT, vehicle license tax, which is new car sales really impact that number too. We really are kind of where we were during the Great Recession. We're kind of back trying to figure out what are we going to do. We do hope, and we think there might be some relief on the cost side. Maybe some of the bid prices might be lower. Certainly there's lower petroleum oil prices that could translate in lower construction costs too. But we'll have to see how it all works out. We're still really early in, so we're monitoring everything on a daily basis.
We got time for probably 2 more. We have another one from Rick Brammer. Is there a plan for an I-17 alternative? It seems like more of a near-term need than an I-11. And I remember there was talk about creating a double-decker I-17 at one point. I'm sure that's high on your list of things to do.
Yeah, well, and in fact, in Prop 400, there was a concept to double deck the part of I-17 through the metro area here. I think cooler heads prevailed, and from an engineering perspective, decided that probably wasn't a good idea, just for a lot of reasons. So there are some alternative. We've done some work on I-17 as it comes through the metro area. We think there's some opportunities to add some additional lanes, even in existing right-of-way, if we're smart about it. The real issue we have with I-17 through the metro area, if you think of the area around the Durango curve and around by the Capitol, that section of I-17 was built in the late 50s, and there really hasn't been much maintenance done. And so some of the road bed is just disintegrated, basically. And so there has to be some major reconstruction of I-17. The older section of I-17 really have to be reconstructed at a cost that starts with a B, as in a billion, and goes up from there. If Rick's talking about alternatives to I-17 up the hill, that's something else that we've looked at. Obviously, there's the back way from Wickenburg up to Prescott, not real good, and then you can go up through Strawberry and Pine and get out by Camp Verde, and that's
Beautiful drives.
Beautiful drive. That is a beautiful drive. You have people on the call haven't done that. You ought to do that. It's really pretty. But turning it into a freeway or something like that is probably not in the cards.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Really appreciate the time, Eric. This is, as always, tremendous information, tremendous data. I want to again thank our sponsors, Colliers. So important to Lambda Alpha International and Applied Economics. Applied Economics, one of their big clients is Maricopa Association of Governments. They provide tremendous data on all fronts for different organizations, not just locally but nationally. So again, thank you, Applied Economics, for your sponsorship today. I believe Sheila put up there, if you're interested in attending, joining Lambda Alpha International, we'd love to have you fill out an online nomination form. It's included in the webinar chat. But otherwise, thank you very much to everybody for taking the time and joining us today. And please look out for the next LAI session. And one of these days, although we love the Zoom meeting format, someday we'd like to get together and see everybody in person again. So again, thank you very much, Eric, for joining us. It's been wonderful, and good luck to you as you start another round of this transportation funding.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
All right.